Hey everyone, Sycra here, and welcome to another episode of Pointy Chins. And in this episode, I'm just going to be having some fun with my pen. And so here we go. These are just some sketches, as usual. But I started thinking about, because I was doing a lot of characters sort of with this proportion, and I like the hair. I like how it's, I don't know, the shape of it. But I was thinking, I used to do a lot more caricature stuff, and I should be bringing more of that in, because character and personality have never been things I've had trouble with. That's something that I always had in my work since I was very young, and so when I was starting the style thing, I wasn't focused on it too much. I was more concerned about getting proportions and things, just making sure I've got a handle on the figure when it's stiff and faces when they're just sort of, neutral. So here I started to bring back some of my expressive things, and some crazy guy with a super thin waist, and some kid. I think this is pretty nice. And here's some more stuff. You've seen this shape before. I've done it a bunch of times, this spiral thing, and I was trying to make it go over the form more in these things, so it's more three-dimensional. These, I don't know what you'd call it, almost like buns on top of her head. And here we go. So this is a lot more of what I was saying with the caricature thing. So yes, it's still in the Pointy style. It still has the markers of that style, such as a small nose and pointy chin, though that's not really absolute anymore. You can see here I got rid of the pointy chin because I realized something else, which was when I first created the pointy chin style, it wasn't called the pointy chin style. It was just my sharp style. And what I was doing is trying to make sure that I'm consistent, always doing the same thing, so the thing looks like it's one cohesive style instead of a bunch of different styles stuck together. And so I told myself, well, what do I know is going to be in this style? Well, it's going to be sharp and pointy and stuff. So I thought, okay, well, let me keep the chins pointy at least, so that it's consistent, at least one part's consistent. And then as I work and figure out the style, I can change the shapes up more, so that I don't need to rely on just pointy chins. But in the beginning, I thought it would be very helpful for me to have that kind of stability. And so, moving on. So here, again, it's that thing that I was talking about where I had the spiral, but it's on a form. So I thought I could practice that by having, by creating spheres and then putting the spiral on top of those spheres. So that's what's happening here. And here's another more caricatured proportion where it's all kind of crazy. But I really like these a lot. And then here it's more stiff again, because I'm thinking more about the perspective, and it's very wrong. I feel this is very flat. You don't get a sense of the rib cage. Also the proportions. If this guy was facing us, I think his neck would be very long. There's just small things that bother me. I don't feel like this is going correctly in perspective. I don't feel enough of this side plane. That's what I would want to see more. But the torso here, it's kind of okay, but it's not quite right. But again, this is all stuff that as you draw more, you learn more and you can see more. So yeah, some cat thingy, and I don't know why, but I did a mech-ish thingy, which is very wrong because I'm not, I'm not experienced with drawing these mechanical things from imagination, or from reference. I don't really draw them at all. And yeah, another figure, and some weird car thing, and this thing, which, I don't know, I kind of find that cool. I don't know if you can see, there's like a nose here, and eyes, and stuff. And here, more perspective-y stuff, because it's always jumping between things, so it's like, okay, let's be more caricatured and expressive, and then it's, oh wait, I've got to keep my perspective going as well. And usually when I focus on perspective, things get a bit more stiff, but I'm allowing for that. It's not like, well, things are stiff, therefore I shouldn't do this. It's more, things are stiff because I'm not used to this. I haven't internalized this yet. It hasn't become part of my muscle memory. And until it does, you're always going to take a hit. And then after, you're more likely to be able to incorporate multiple things like expressiveness and crazy proportions and caricatured stuff. So here's just some characters, just some crickets jumping around and stuff. This guy's jumping over a box, and the reason is just, again, that perspective. Boxes are a good way of having perspective in your scene. Like, if you have a scene and it's a character, if you throw in a box, well, the box has to be in perspective, and so the character has to be in the same perspective. So by adding the box in the beginning, it almost makes it so you cannot create the character unless it's in the same perspective as the box, or it won't look right. So here what I was doing is some fan art for the convention. Now, it's a bit weird because I talked about my experiences at the convention in last week's video, but right now in this Pointy Chins episode, like the date I did this image was March 25th, 2015, and right now, today as I'm doing the recording, it's May 23rd, 2015, and so this was pre-convention, whereas now I have the experience of after the convention. So before this, I was thinking like, well, it's probably good to do fan art, and I mentioned how I didn't include any fan art in my convention and the stuff I produced. There wasn't any fan art, but I wasn't like completely oblivious to the fact that fan art sells. I was more not sure about how much more it sold than non-fan art. So I thought, okay, let me do fan art of a character. And Flavia really likes this character from League of Legends, Orianna. And I don't actually, like, I've never played League of Legends and I don't know the characters. So it's not really fan art because I can't say I'm a fan of this. But it was just an idea of, okay, this isn't, by no means is this the final. This is more like a thumbnail sketch of what I thought, okay, maybe I could have the character doing a pose like this with the ball in the background because she has this big ball. Well, this is what the character looks like. She has this floating ball, and I think that middle section spins around and stuff. But again, I don't know this character, so it was just me taking this character, putting my style on it, and thinking, okay, how does this feel? Would I be able to do fan art? And it was not a good feeling for me. It felt really forced and difficult. And probably because I'm not, used to this character. But even with characters I am used to, it's a bit difficult for me to do these things. So anyway, this was just an idea, like, can I do fan art? Because I know it would be I figured it might be somewhat successful. So here, going back to sketching, and I don't know if there's anything really noteworthy on this page. Just some more perspective stuff, a little bit of caricature stuff. This page I like. So here, again, more caricatured expressions, but this one felt a bit stiff because, it's okay, but he's just head on, and there's not much personality because there's not much asymmetry. And so I did this one, which has, a bit more personality to it, in my opinion, than this one, because he's got, one part of his lip is raised higher than the other and stuff. And then this character I also like. I felt like, yeah, and you'll notice, again, no pointy chin. Not because I'm getting rid of the pointy chins, but simply because I don't want to be completely limited by it, especially now that my style is getting more strong, and I figured out about that concave shape thing. Instead of just triangles everywhere, it's more you have concave shapes. And even with these type of flat chins. Like here on this guy, for instance, it is sharp. It's just 2 points. See? Point, point, so there's that. And here's another page. This time I used some Copic markers for some shading, and I like this guy in the top corner. He's got like an action-y pose. These are poses I like a lot, but I always feel like I should make sure my proportions and everything are good before I tackle these a lot, because it feels advanced for me. And I guess that might seem a bit strange considering, I mean, I'm technically a working professional, but in starting this style thing, I knew that just because I've drawn a lot, it doesn't mean I've drawn in, like, I have a lot of mileage or experience with this stuff, with this style stuff. And often this happens when you use, especially when you're a realistic painter and you rely heavily on reference. When you start doing stuff from your imagination, you might quickly find that without the reference, it becomes much, much harder. And so this was my issue the whole way through since I started this, was that when I would look at works of artists that I admired who were comic artists or artists that just did a lot of stuff from imagination, was really cool, they didn't use reference as much as the artists, and sometimes not at all. I think Joe Mad does barely uses reference, I think. Frank Frazetta, he said he never used reference. I'm not sure on that, but I'll just have to believe it because I saw it on a documentary, I think, where he said he never used reference. And so it's a case of like, well, how come these artists can do it without reference and then other artists like myself could only do things with reference? And I think it's because you get better at what you do. So without reference, it's going to be a lot harder, a lot more work. But that's not saying that it's impossible. It just means you have to put in that work. You have to work a lot harder. And I was okay for that. It's like, you know what? The result would be that I can create awesome stuff from my mind using crazy perspective and dynamic stuff and not being a slave to reference. My visual memory is going to be much stronger. That's something I want. That's worth putting in the extra time. That's worth going from, hey, you're already sort of professional level and now you're going back to a noob level. Well, sure, it's fine. You know, I guess the worst part is sometimes I get comments from meaner people, usually not on YouTube, but other places where it's like, oh, he's a noob and look, he can't even do this or that and whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's fine. You know, think that if you want. But in the end, I'm going to be able to do cool stuff. And then I don't think people will be able to say that and have much of a point. More caricatured stuff. There's caricatures. I really don't like the stiffness in this arm, and you know where the elbow is, it's a bit too high. But again, I'm playing around with proportions and different body types. So this woman's very muscular and got this big, kind of hair. And this thing, I don't know what it is, but I guess these are all eyes all around some monster thing. More perspective again. You can see the lines suggesting a vanishing point. It's not exact. But I found it doesn't need to be exact to give your brain a sense of perspective. It just has to be close enough. And with this one, I've started to get to the point where I don't need to put in the lines all the time to get a sense of this. And that's cool, because what it means is, sure, you start out, this guy's funny, you start out needing a lot of crutches, almost like or training wheels, right? Like when you first ride a bike and you're very young, you might be using training wheels, but then after a while you can take those off. And I feel the same is true for guidelines. But at the same time, sometimes it's nice to use them anyway, even when you've internalized it, simply because it doesn't hurt, you know? Having a straight up and down line, for instance, when you're drawing from photo reference doesn't hurt to make sure you're not getting things skewed too much one way or another, because I have this problem where I suppose even with this figure, like you probably, if you brought this into Photoshop and you flipped it, it would probably be a bit skewed because I have a bias, and it's the same bias as my handwriting because I'm right-handed, all the figures seem to tilt in one direction, and if I just use a skew or a rotate, I can usually correct that. So anyway, here's some more crickets doing crazy stuff, and some more action poses, some more expressive poses, some cat thingies, some more hair or ribbons. And I like this character, that's kind of nice. And you can see I was drawing through the form, so it's not like his face is really dirty, it's just that's his neck and where it would go, were you able to see through. And it's not perfect, but because I think there would be more of an angle, and it's... But anyway, point is, it's attached pretty okay. And again, more crazy hair. Some shading with the pen, the Copic marker. And I think it was here that I started doing this thing. I had done this tutorial, I don't know how long it was, a few weeks ago. It was a tutorial describing how I draw heads and have them tilted, and it's creating the second oval inside to describe the front plane. You can see here's kind of where it started, because I guess I was doing it... Was I doing it here? A little bit. I mean, there's a little bit of it here where I guess I'm just starting to do this, but it's not like I'm doing it all the time. But here I started to do it more. See, there's that front plane, and this is really how I figure it out. And this is why I say drawing and mileage is so important. Provided you're always stretching, you're always pushing yourself. It's because of things like this. Like, you will just do something, and maybe it's on one drawing, and it's like, oh, let me just try this, and then realize, like, oh, that actually helped, or didn't help. Because there's plenty of things that I'm doing that are weird. Like, okay, let's say this looks ugly to me, and this way of doing the hair is ugly, and I wouldn't do this again, but it might have actually been cool. And let's say it had been cool, then it would be something like, oh, okay, because I experimented and maybe I found something unique or interesting, it's like, oh, I could do that again next time. Same with this, like, oh, does pushing the neck this long look good? And then often it's like the answer is no, you know, it's not cool, it's too far. But sometimes the answer is yes, or not yet, but maybe soon. And I think this character is really funny. It's just, I don't know, arms on this big face. So, yep. Here I used some pink Copic marker. And here is a life drawing of a cat sleeping, done from life. And some more guys. I didn't like this one. It's kind of a zombie-ish pose, I suppose, but again, very stiff. So I wanted to give more of a curve to it. There's some S-curve in this body here, and I think it looks nicer. Of course, implausible abs and stuff, but not impossible, I guess, but just very stretched. I like to stretch all my characters, push and pull them to extremes. So here what I was doing is I took a look at a tutorial by Keenan Lafferty, and he has a webcomic called Emma, and he also has a YouTube channel where he posts a lot of really good art advice and tutorials and stuff. And so he had, and I'll post a link to the tutorial in the description where he was talking about this. But anyway, he was talking about how if you have a rectangle and like you break it up using 2 lines or something like that. But anyway, you have that. What is a way of getting an appealing distribution of these things? And you've heard me probably before. I had followed a Doxy tutorial talking about similar things to this, and even before that, it was something where I was trying to figure out for myself as well. How do you divide a shape? How do you make an appealing shape? Because this seems very abstract, or maybe not even useful, and yet it's super, super important in order to get appeal. And so I did this one, which is just, okay, this is almost identical, just divided very evenly. And then this one where you have a medium shape, very small shape, and then a larger shape. So you have medium, small, large, and this kind of thing, or large, small, medium, tends to be a lot more appealing, and that's what was on the Keenan Lafferty video. So I was doing that for a while, and then just exploring on my own different ways of doing things, like here, just different areas. How would I distribute it? So with tutorials, I think it's good to look at them and test them out, but also take things into your own hands as well. Almost like you're trying to teach it to someone else, or even yourself, what you've learned in the tutorial. I find when you do this, it really makes it easier for you to remember the thing, and also tests you how much you know what you're watching. Because sometimes it's a case of, we'll watch things or even like in school, let's say you read something and it's like, okay, I've read it, therefore I understand it. But if someone asks you a question like, well, you know, what is this really about, or can you describe this? Sometimes it's more difficult to actually explain, and what that's showing is that you don't understand it as well as you think you do. So there's that. But also, the main thing about doing it yourself is that every time you do something yourself, you're building these neural pathways in your mind that will help you to do anything related to that easier in the future. So here we go again with some perspective-y stuff, and using a marker to just bring out some areas. And this guy's reading a newspaper, and this person's looking at the watch, their own watch, and yeah, not much else. Here's a creature, I guess. And here's some more crickets. So again, you know, always revisiting, always doing something, trying something else, and revisiting it to bring these pieces together. You always want to be working, well, okay, for me anyway, it's helped to work on multiple things at the same time. But the other way also works, so I shouldn't say you always want to do anything, because when I was learning values, for instance, I only studied values for a month and nothing else really. So it was very dedicated study, and I think that's good. But I think this is also good, where you dedicate for a bit, but also keep switching up so that you remind yourself what I learned. And here, I'm taking this spiral shape that I like and just making it three-dimensional. And then here what I did, so here are some more perspective-y things, very stiff, very boring, trying to, again, cut myself some slack for having stiffer poses, just because it's like, okay, I'm working on something else right now, but later I hope I will combine these better. And then here what I had done is actually something that I had people suggest. So when I made my last video covering the convention, I got some recommendations for people who were saying things like, if you're having trouble with fan art, why don't you do it in your style instead of the style of the thing? And so before I had already, like, I guess it's good because I had the same idea as people were giving me. So that was one thing. And in my first try with this Oriana character, I tried to do it in my own style, but the same character. And another person had said in the last video, like, you had done this Wolverine redesign where you redesigned the character, so what if you did it from that? And this was also an idea. So I thought, why don't I just redesign it? And is that going to be easier? And I definitely had a lot more fun redesigning it. Now, again, I'm sorry if you're a fan of League of Legends, because maybe I don't have much of a right to be playing with this character, because, again, I don't know her too well. But I thought, whatever, let me just give it a shot. And I didn't end up using this, but it's like, okay, let's see how I would take her. And I thought I wanted to make her more doll-like and have these, like, sharp legs that there's no feet really, it just descends into a spike, and she could maybe stand on her ball and then spin around like a ballerina in a music box, because that's what I was just, maybe because I don't know the character, I'm just making up stuff. And so I had this look where maybe her eyes moved independently from each other, and just wanted to make it more creepy. Maybe her arms separate and so it's all sectioned off, but instead of just being circles here, maybe they're like wires, and maybe the ball is different. These are just different takes on the ball. This one, it's kind of like an aperture opening and closing, where it's like, and this one is more that there's an eyeball within the ball, and maybe it's a flat thing. I don't know. So just different ideas. And again, I never really went anywhere with it, but it was kind of a good exercise. And here what I'd done is a study of Francis Manipul, who's a comic book artist, and he's very good. And, you know, once in a while, I'll think about things like, I avoid using or doing copies of other people's work, but every once in a while it's like, yeah, maybe I should give it a try, maybe I can learn something. And this one I gave it a try. And again, I don't think I learned too much, or at least if I am learning it, I'm not aware of it. But I did it anyway, and it's like, okay, just to do it, maybe I need to do it a lot in order to really see the benefits of it. And some more thumbnail stuff. And again, more thumbnail characters. I didn't shade these in. It's quite amazing how much of a difference it makes if you just block in the character, so you get a read of the negative and positive shapes more clearly, but it's something that I did not do on this occasion. And here, I think my pens were running out, so I had to move to a green pen, and it's not my favorite color for pens because it doesn't show up well when it's scanned, and it's also kind of hard to see for me anyway. So more thumbnails. I like this character. I like the hair. It's like, that's cool. And the shapes are nice, very appealing. And what else? So this page, I don't know. I guess not much interest. Trying a different, you know, style, I guess, here. And then here, I like this guy. I don't know what he is, but whatever he is, I kind of like him. And then here, trying some poses from reference, because I realized it's been a while since I did that. So I just put some figures on my iPad and then just did these photo things, but still in my style. So that's the real challenge, is taking the figures and putting them in your style. And I think it looks okay. I usually have pretty decent results. It's a little stiff, especially here. It's a little bit stiff. But yeah. And then for here, so Flavia got this hairband, and what it is, it's like, okay, so this is an elastic, and these parts are just metal, and then here I don't think it's real hair. I think it's plastic or something. But anyway, it's colorful, and it kind of looks like hair. They're just strands, and they're attached here. And so I thought I could use this to figure out twisting forms. And so that's what I did. So I did this one first, and this is from Live reference, I guess. And then I did this one beside it to try and understand what was happening. And then again, the same thing. This one is from the Live reference. Basically, any ones with these metal parts on either side are from Life, and then the ones beside are my takes on it, trying to take it and simplify it and explore it and understand it better. So here, I didn't think I did a very good job here, but it's like, okay, here, this is from Life, and it's like, oh, that's cool how the twist goes like that, and it sort of spreads out, like the lines are closer together here, then they spread out more, and then they get tighter again, and so in this case they got tighter, and then they got more loose here. So trying that out, you know, it's important. Like, this stage is much more important. The second stage is much more important than the first stage. Because the first stage, it's really good and you're learning stuff, but a lot of it, for me anyway, it's dependent on the reference. So if I did this, it's just like, okay, I used a reference and I could do something with a reference. But the second stage is, can you do it without the reference, and can you understand it? Because if you can understand it, then everything becomes much more... you own it. You own this knowledge. You're not just borrowing it. You're not just, you know, taking it out because you had some help. You can do this. It's like, no, even without help, I can understand this. So I didn't understand it perfectly, but I did learn some things about twisty stuff like this one. I think is done pretty well from imagination, trying to understand understand what's happening. It's not perfect. And here I tried to put it on a letter. So in this case, it's a Y. But anyway, it was a good exercise, and maybe one that I'll do again. And I really recommend, exploring, even with this one, do it, use the reference from photos or from life, but then also try and do it from imagination and see if you can incorporate it. So in the next episode, it's called Bristol, and I'm going to be exploring using Bristol paper. And it is very difficult, so I hope you'll stick with me and stay tuned for that episode. And thanks for watching this episode.